I will tell you that we have lost it back home, and the challenge is for us to retrace. But again, in doing that, a few of you, our brothers and sisters here who have the initiative, who are next door to these NGOs and international organizations, must go back, cup in hand, knocking on our doors. Because the challenge is there, the problem is still home, and we must do something about it. Domesticating regional intervention conventions and keeping treaty obligations. These ones are jargons that we must meet up. If an organization is coming to your place, there are expectations, and we're living up to that expectation. Then, economic meltdown. This is a global trend that Benue State is not living in isolation. We can't operate in an island, and I will tell you that in Nigeria today, the economic meltdown has also been compounded by the Niger Delta crisis. If you are news, it is global, you know, CNN that for the last few months there has been crisis in the Niger Delta. And Nigeria is producing below half the capacity of our crude oil exports now. What that also means is that states in Nigeria, like Benue, predominantly depend on one, allocation, federal allocation. We come from our statutory allocations, and importantly to crude oil reserve sales. If you talk about statutory allocation, a state like Benue gets averagely, if my statistics are right, between 1.2 to 1.4 billion. What it also means in turn is that about 750 million of that money is spent on overhead costs and paying of staff, personnel. By the time you add monies which will contribute to counterpart funding and the rest, it means in a month about 1.2 billion is spent. Which also means that if money doesn't come from IGR, which is zero in most cases, and the money doesn't come from crude oil reserves, then it means we're in trouble. And that is the crisis we've been facing in Nigeria and of course in Benue for the last 6 months. What it means that once money cannot come from crude oil reserves, then it means you don't have money to do infrastructure. In fact, you will sympathize with the present governor now because when he came in, I think with the vigor and the enthusiasm, he moved in contracting companies. If you are hearing about the road construction and the streetlights and everything, there are construction companies on the ground. But the crisis today is that he can hardly meet up paying with them. So what does he do? Every week in and out, you're on the road going to Abuja. At times you travel 2-3 times a week going to Abuja, or you're on the road flying out of the country to look for sources of money somewhere, which is a crisis itself because already he's been accused of traveling too much. But also the crisis is that you sit back and look at your people and then you end up doing nothing. So either way, it's between the devil and the deep blue sea. It's a crisis that we must look at. Then, just to rush it, kudos to current MOTA effort. I think collectively as MOTA, we must clap for ourselves. One, because of the individual comments, analysis, especially on TeamNet and Team have variously shaped governance. I told you a story earlier on where I had to challenge the governor himself about his attitude and response to the attack. But I must tell you sincerely, people, most at times, people who contribute on TeamNet and a team, in most cases, have not had, with all fairness, have not had a recent grasp with the happenings at home. It is also understood that the last impression you had about governance at home was probably a very unfortunate and bad one. But I tell you that most often it is better that if you want to contribute or comment on an issue of governance, you should ask a fellow brother or sister who has been home. I think that gives us a better picture than just at times criticizing in a manner, that leaves the facts as they are. It discourages governance itself. I want to believe I'm not overflowing the point, I'm driving it home. The health fairs have spoken for themselves. I mentioned that earlier, and government's conscious efforts to make sure that next year's health fair should be better than the one we had in the previous 2 years. Individual input from members towards investment flows. Without mentioning names here, a handful of members, a good number, have written to the governor of Benue State. A few of them, again, I must confess, have been home, but unfortunately have also not received the desired attention. But again, we must appreciate what governance is at home. We operate in a system where you don't have a structure at all. The governor wakes up, you have a program of events, Dr. Steve Uba is in, Mrs. Jennifer or whoever is in, has an appointment to meet with him by 12. And then he wakes up and discovers that you have a truckload of people who have moved in from Anyi or from somewhere, who in any case believe that they desire to be attended to more than whoever comes. In fact, you don't even go telling them that brothers are coming in from the diaspora and so sorry, I cannot see. If that's what they would have an appointment, they cannot understand with you. That's just a practical example. But I think we must keep knocking on these doors. And I must appeal to you on behalf of the governor that it is unintended and we still look forward to contributions from our brothers and sisters, the ability to sustain the vision of founding fathers of MUTA. I think that one you know better than we do. But it is our own belief also that as an instrument of sustainable development, I think the primary aim of MUTA was to see how you can mobilize yourselves here, gather resources, wealth, intellectual and otherwise, and push, repatriate back home to better our environment. And I think you are doing that remarkably well, and the government is encouraging that we keep doing that within our capacities. Proposal to MUTA and how we can raise developmental stakes. First is volunteerism. Volunteerism still falls back to the same health fair issue. And I think if we crack our brains beyond health fair, we would also, somebody mentioned a project that our mothers are doing here about the orphanage homes. And I think without boring us, I will share an experience. I think it may be premature. I don't know whether it's premature to share that experience. One thing which I know that is not premature is also to tell us that it is good to help where a hand in need. I've been married for 4 years, so that is just recent. Good.
What's the number for
June 4th. So that's why, so it's over 4 years, isn't it? Slightly over 4 years. Anyway, but the experience has been that for these 4 years, I've not had an issue. I had neither a daughter or a son. And so 4 years for a mother or for a married couple who have not been blessed should be very, at times, traumatizing. You understand? So sometime last year, okay, on Xmas Day particularly, I had just resolved with my wife that for the last Xmas, we would spend with the Mama Abayo orphanage home. I think it's part of your project target. And so, out of nothing but few, I drove with my wife with the bag of rice or a carton of, because for the last few years it was a tradition. And maybe as a government aid appointee, when it's Christmas, you pack these things and then you go paying homage. For this Christmas, we decided that with my wife, we'll go and spend it with our family. Have time, pray together, play, have fun, and even really came to terms with the feelings of these little kids there. But I tell you something, exactly 1 week after Christmas, that is New Year Day, my wife conceived. Wow. This is not a church, but with all fairness, I strongly believe that that visit had something very spiritual to do with it. So that's why I think she's still pregnant, so I don't know whether it's premature to share this experience. You know, but a prayer to me is a prayer. But one thing I know is that it's not premature to have at any time. And so we must volunteer in our own little way